Rolling, or dodging, or whatever you want to call it, is the most integral part of surviving in the Souls games. Being able to time your rolls in order to avoid the attacks of enemies and bosses is one of the core aspects of this franchise. So today we're going to see if I can beat Dark Souls 1 without using any rolls. And since the main way to combat this inconvenience is by running, I decided to let my Souls masochism shine through further by not allowing myself to run either. Also, in order to make things a bit more interesting, I'm sticking to a few unspoken rules, being no magic and no parrying, because both of those things would make certain parts a hell of a lot easier. So with all that said, let's begin. You know, I always like to guess which item description I'll get between the two intro cutscenes. Oh, the Claymore. I wonder if that's foreshadowing. Anyway, the Asylum goes pretty much exactly as you'd expect. Got freed by Oscar, obtained some good old bottled fire, and fought the Asylum demon. Luckily, I did a small bit of practice before starting this challenge because, obviously after years of this being my favorite game series, I knew that fighting my instinct to roll would be a bit troublesome, but now that I've got it down, the Asylum demon is about as easy as he always is. Also, while I'm here, I'll mention that there is technically one type of rolling allowed for the challenge. This kind. A lot of heavy attacks from bosses give you this backwards rolling animation when you block them, so for anyone who tries to call me out because they saw me roll in some capacity, that's why. Now with the tutorial complete, let's get into it. As you would imagine, the first area wasn't much of a hassle. In fact, when you're this early on, it's arguable that blocking is actually more practical than dodging, since most of the enemies here have a short stun animation after hitting your shield, which makes them really easy to finish off. Then after putting a few extra points in strength, I decided to use the trusty's Y-hander. I know it requires me to quickly grab it with two hands after blocking, but damn is it fun swinging this heap of metal around, especially since it lets me annihilate the Black Knights. Then onto our next boss, the Taurus Demon. All in all, things were still pretty easy. It was a bit tedious, since due to the linear structure of his arena, all I can really do is try to bait his attacks and slowly come in afterward for a hit. Also, this attack is able to deal chip damage when I'm blocking, which is a nuisance, but after a slightly drawn out brawl, the Taurus Demon is finished. Afterward, I paid a visit to a fellow resident of Astora, baited the dragon for an easy bonfire, and picked up the Claymore in the process because, who knows, maybe I'll want it at some point. Turns out, I wanted it quicker than I expected. The Y-hander is fun and all, but having to two-hand it every time after blocking got to me a bit faster than expected. So we're already using the basic bitch strategy, only 2 areas into the game. Once we make it to the Andre bonfire, it's time to begin farming. Considering that this run is going to rely heavily on the blocking capability of my shield, the main aspect of my strategy will be to get the shield with the highest possible stability in the game, which belongs to the Great Shield of Artorias, with a whopping 88. But since I won't be able to get it until about halfway through the run, I'm gonna have to settle on a shield for the early game, so I figured I'd use the Balder shield, due to its relatively high stability, along with not having high strength requirements like some other shields. The only issue is that I have to farm Balder Knights in order to get it. So after doing that for about an hour and a half, we got it. I won't lie, part of why I chose it is because it looks cool. It's gonna help me feel more stylish once we've got a nice armor set. All in all, the stability isn't that noticeably different from the Hydra shield, but it's still something. For those of you who don't know, stability is a rating that determines how much damage your shield can soak up before an attack penetrates your health bar, meaning the higher your stability, the less stamina gets taken when blocking. After battling a Titanite demon for some extra souls, I took a quick trip to the Darkroot Garden to pick up one of my favorite armor sets in the entire Souls series. Right now it's a bit too heavy for us, making our walking speed a little too slow for my liking, so we'll use it later. Speaking of walking speed, this was about the point in the run where I realized just how much of a nuisance the whole no running part would be. It gets pretty drawn out at times. Next, I headed back to the Undead Parish Church in order to free the mischievous Golden Boy so that we could be friends. I'd never think of doing anything harmful to him. So after kicking him off a cliff, we've now got the Fap Ring. Yeah, sorry man, but right now I need as much stamina as I can get. It's been the main stat I've upgraded by this point, since that green bar is the only thing standing between my enemies and my precious health bar. After getting my Claymore to +4, it's time for the next boss fight. At first, I was feeling pretty damn confident, since my Claymore was dishing out some awesome damage. But things got a bit hectic after the second gargoyle joined the fray. As it turns out, not being able to dodge or run makes it a lot more challenging than usual to split aggro between opponents, which led to a pretty messy second half. But ultimately, I found a good window to finish off the first one, making the rest a breeze. And with that, I defeated them with 0 deaths, meaning we've rung our first Bell of Awakening. Of course, right after that, we get to witness one of the most cursed laughs I've ever heard. And get my favorite gesture in the game. Usually by this point in a casual Dark Souls 1 playthrough, I'd be heading to the Darkroot Basin Cave to take the easy way into the backside of Blighttown. But since I intend to defeat every boss in the game for the sake of the video, I figured I'd just take the standard route through the depths. Which means it's time to take on the Capra Demon, everyone's favorite boss. Honestly, it wasn't that bad. I utilized the stairs to split the aggro of the dogs, and once they're defeated, Capra himself isn't much of a hassle. Sorry buddy, but you're more or less just another speed bump on the run. Also, since I've now put enough points into endurance, I can use the elite knight armor without having to slow walk. Hell yeah. This right here is peak drip. Now that I'm feeling stylish, it's time to venture into the most disgusting area of the game. I dealt with some rats as usual, defeated the mage dude so he wouldn't make my fight with the gaping dragon a nightmare, and eventually got to the gaping dragon. Sadly, I ended up dying less than a minute in from his wide tail swing attack, which I honestly don't recall ever seeing before this playthrough, but oh well. Since I had skipped getting the bonfire on my first trip to the dragon, I decided to get it this time around instead of respawning at Firelink Shrine again. I don't know if it's just me, but I think the amount of basilisks in this area is a bit redundant. At least ragdoll physics are hilarious. Now for our rematch. Overall, fighting this boss without the regular mobility you get was a lot more of a problem than I had anticipated. It's not like it turns the fight into Consort Radon 2.0 or whatever, but it was able to get the jump on me a lot more than it normally could. The biggest things to watch out for were the charge attack and those damn tail swings. Also, I never even knew that this attack existed before. Wild. But while it wasn't a very clean victory, I still got it after only 1 death. Following this, it was time to make the trek into Blighttown. Unfortunately, not being able to run means that it's a lot more difficult than usual to outmaneuver basic enemies. And remember when I was complaining about the abundance of basilisks earlier?
Curse you!
Yep, I did the thing. I got cursed. I'll remember this when making the Dark Souls 1 enemy ranking, you little shits. Eventually, I made my way back to that one merchant who sells purging stones, and freed myself from the curse of not having fun. Now for Blighttown, where I got hit by a toxic dart and died before the first bonfire. Thanks, Blighttown. Something else that I didn't consider before starting this run was how agonizingly slow walking through the swamp would be. I mean, it's not that bad, but it does present its own issues. Next is the boss whose cutscene always plays right when your parents walk in. I felt pretty confident about my chances against Quelaag, since this is definitely one of the bosses I know best in the game. Aside from her fiery swings dealing chip damage, fighting her with the shield tanking strategy was pretty consistent. I did die once from the lava since I wasn't watching where I was going, but a lot of her attacks keep her immobile for pretty long periods of time, making her a pretty unnoteworthy speed bump in the run. Now, with the second Bell of Awakening taken care of, we can officially move on to the mid-game. But while I was near the demon ruins, I figured I'd get some free souls from Ceaseless Discharge, cause why not? I mean, what could possibly happen? It's Ceaseless Discharge. So I grabbed his sister's clothes, slowly walked over to the spot where I could cheese him, and okay then. That was weird, though I figured I could just walk right back in and do it properly the second time. But I guess it had been so long since I died to this goober that I forgot the cheese doesn't work if you don't walk over to him first. Unfortunately, I also forgot just how horrendously god-awful his moveset is. Believe it or not, this was one of the biggest walls of my entire run. Mostly because of this one combo in particular where he knocks you to the ground, followed by a slam. Without any iframe dodges, this combo seemed genuinely unavoidable. And once you start walking away from him, it seems to be his favorite thing to do, which was able to finish me off 5 times in a row. So eventually I figured I'd bite the bullet and ditch my awesome armor for extra mobility. I tried to bait him into going to the back of the arena, which kinda didn't work, but with a bit of strategy, along with probably mostly luck, we're finally back to square one. This is by far the most relieved I've ever been to get this idiot stuck, so I took some time to revel in it, of course, and then finally finished him off. You know, I've always kinda just felt indifferent towards this guy, but with this experience under my belt, if I do end up making a ranking of every boss in the series, he's gonna be a fair amount lower than he was before, since I now have distinct memories of just how shitty his attacks are. But with that bullshit in the past, it's time to head back above ground.
Did you ring the second bell? That is incredible, I must say.
I know, I'm just that guy. But before we head to Sens, there's something I want to get done first. In order to obtain the Great Shield of Artorias, we need to defeat Sif and bring his soul to the Anor Londo blacksmith. But considering where I'm at in the game, I really don't feel like spending 20k souls to get the Crest of Artorias. I will kill the Moonlight Butterfly though for some extra levels. So since I'm not down to pay Andre for the path to Sif, I decided to take the alternate route by defeating the Hydra. Though, not gonna lie, after countless playthroughs of this game, I've grown to despise this enemy. Finishing off the final heads is always a bad time. So I did what I always do and cheesed it by chucking fire bombs in this corner. I feel no shame. I also figured I'd free Dusk now rather than later, but also forgot how painfully slow I walk in water. Then I had an excruciatingly slow fight with the Gold Golem, securing our entrance to the DLC for later on. And now for Sif. I got a bit lost on the way, since I rarely ever use this path to get there, getting mauled by the giant cats in the process who give absolutely zero shits about me trying to shield myself. But eventually, we made it. With a +5 Claymore, our damage isn't that great, but it's still more than enough to be manageable. As far as fighting Sif with a tank build, it was very drawn out, being about an 8-minute fight, but once I figured out what to do, it was just about having patience. Most of the attacks weren't too troublesome. I could usually get by from blocking and taking every possible opportunity to get under the dog for some damage. But the one dangerous attack was this spinny move. Blocking it once with a full stamina bar was fine, but if Sif decided to use it 2 times in a row, it was guaranteed to break through my defense. So eventually I realized that the best strategy is to back away every time after this move happens. Doing so gave me just enough space that I could regen my stamina to block it again if necessary. It was a little tedious, especially since Sif really liked to spam that attack, but regardless, I still won on the first try. Now for good ol' Sen's Fortress. I was a little anxious about how this would go, but it ended up being pretty unnoteworthy. Just some regular old Sen's Fortress shenaniganry. I was skeptical about being able to cross some of the axe bridges without running, but it seems that they were designed so that you can cross them even when walking. I considered buying a few large Titanite shards from the merchant, but I forgot that I'm literally incapable of jumping without running. Onto the Iron Golem. Honestly, this boss may have been the most similar to how it regularly is out of any in the run. As long as you stay near the feet, you can kinda just outwalk most of the attacks pretty consistently. I did end up falling once from hanging out in the narrow section where I was trying to knock him off, so I played it safer in the second attempt and came out victorious. Next, it's time to watch my favorite cutscene in the game as we get a free ride into one of the most beloved areas in the entire series. Overall, Anor Londo went pretty swimmingly. easily. I didn't fall off the rafters, got past the archers in one try, and once again met up with the optimistic fellow resident of my hometown. Now for the moment I've been waiting for. I upgraded my Baldur shield to plus 10, used the Soul of Sif, and transformed it into the most stable shield in the entire game. I also upgraded my Claymore to plus 10 just to be safe, and went to take on the iconic duo. My first attempt went pretty terrible, since trying to split aggro between two dangerous enemies while having barely any mobility is naturally a bit challenging, leading me to end up trapped in a corner and sniped by Ornstein's lightning. But if I learned anything from fighting Sif, it's that my biggest advantage on this run is my defense. As long as I continue to abuse the safety of my high stability shield, I can be practically invincible. It's just a matter of not getting greedy and waiting long enough for openings to sneak in damage. After Ornstein's finished, the fight is basically over. Smo isn't a complete pushover on his own, but it's still a hell of a lot easier than fighting both of them at once. Man, I think I've used the Claymore's thrust attack more in this run than all of my previous playthroughs of the game combined. What can I say, I'm usually a two-handed enjoyer. But now that the first half of the game has been conquered, it's time to get the Lord Vessel from the Dynast of Double D's so we can move on to the second half. Since things had been going pretty smooth, I was feeling ballsy and decided to jump headfirst into the DLC, even though I had a feeling that this place was going to be the biggest wall of the run, considering the generally faster boss tempo in Ulasil. So, how did the Sanctuary Guardian go? It was a little rough. The fact that it attacks at a quick pace is one thing, but those damn lightning projectiles were easily some of the biggest nuisances I've had to deal with thus far. While the Great Shield of Artorias has the best stability that the game can offer, its resistances to non-physical damage aren't the best, with lightning actually being the worst one at only 40%. Also, damn, that was a stylish finisher. Bro thinks he's playing a Devil May Cry game. From here on, my goal was to always get as close as possible to the Guardians, since those projectiles were easily the most dangerous part of the fight. My windows to attack were pretty few and far between, but it's made up for by the fact that this boss doesn't have a very big health bar. Once I got it down, as long as he wasn't in the mood for spamming lightning, it wasn't all that bad. Beaten in 4 attempts. Following that, I took a stroll through the Royal Woods, where I got a glimpse of the boss that was easily the one I've been the most concerned about, and then moved on to the infamous Abyss Walker. In terms of the sheer danger of his moveset, this was one of the hardest fights in the run. Blocking his moves and following up with an attack from a medium speed weapon doesn't have a whole lot of guaranteed windows. And since I'm incapable of running toward him, it was basically a guarantee that he'd always be able to finish his power-up animation, making his damage even more punishing. But by this point, I knew what I had to do. Play as defensively as possible and try to limit my attacks to be as safe as I could. Even if it was pretty disappointing at times to see stuff like him completing an entire triple flip combo and still not getting a window to attack. But through sheer patience and a 9-minute fight, I managed to beat him with only 1 death. After how long that took, I figured there was no point in holding back my build any further, so I went to the New Londo ruins to get the very large ember.
Long ago, the knight Artorias traversed the abyss. If you can find him and learn from him, the abyss may prove surmountable.
Bro, I literally just beat his ass. Anyway, I got the Ember and an extra Titanite chunk so I could get my Claymore to plus 13. While I was in the mood for getting chores done, I figured I'd tackle some of my least favorite content in the game, so I headed for the Demon Ruins where I got eaten alive by this stupid thing. I hope you're ready for your super low placement on the enemy ranking. Asshole. Next was the Demon Fire Sage. All in all, it's a pretty easy fight, with or without rolling, but the one part that really sucked for this run was the explosion spells. Sometimes I could just outspace them like usual, but man, he really enjoys spamming them, which dealt a lot of chip damage. But like I said, still pretty easy. Next is the Centipede Demon. You know, I've always found it so bizarre that this shitty ass boss has a full-on cutscene for it. Like, why? It's one of the most embarrassing fights in the series.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be able to make it to the safe space in the middle of the arena without running and jumping, so instead I went out of my way to cut off the demon's tail and get the lava ring mid-fight, which did kill me in the process, but at least it made the rematch a cakewalk. Next, after trudging through Lost Izalith, we have the Bed of Chaos. As you would imagine, this wasn't significantly different from a regular Bed of Chaos encounter. Got the first target, fell in a hole. Got the second target, died from the sweeps, managed to drop onto the branch, died from that stupid one-shotting fire move, dropped again, and finished the job. The one nice thing about Bed of Chaos in this run was that I was able to block the hand sweep attacks, so that's kinda neat. Still the worst boss in the entire series though. From there, I moved on to the Catacombs. I was expecting my lack of running to really suck here, since I'd need to be able to catch up to the Necromancers and keep them from reviving the Skellies. But I guess I just got pretty lucky with them, and actually didn't die a single time in this area. I even got to block the Bone Wheels, which felt immensely satisfying after years of getting bullied by them. Patiently waiting around to finish them off also made me realize just how ridiculously many of them there are. Definitely one of the most abhorrent ganks in the game. Then there was Pinwheel. And then there wasn't. Onto the Tomb of the Giants. Once this area is complete, I'm officially done with the levels I don't like, so let's wrap it up. But before doing so, I felt like bullying Patches a little. Next is our second Lord Soul boss, Nito. I wasn't too concerned about this guy, since he's usually not much of a challenge to beat. But he did pose some unique problems for the run, with the main one being this stupid ass projectile thrust. The only way to avoid it is by dodging, so I had to just tank it every single time, giving me toxic buildup less than 30 seconds into the fight. Great. But once I got up close, it was more or less a regular Nito fight. The respawning skeletons aren't cool, but at least I can one-shot them, and when you've got him alone, Nito's moveset isn't a particularly dangerous one, so I beat him in less than 4 minutes. Well, while we're still doing main game stuff, let's head to the Grand Archives. I went there and did the normal Grand Archives stuff. Died to the initial Seath encounter, broke out of jail, did the Harry Potter stairs thing, and moved on to the Crystal Cave. These days, I tend to just see Seath as a pushover, and as I imagined, not being able to roll wasn't much of an issue here. I should be able to beat him in one try. The only thing that could potentially ruin this is if I got cursed by him.
Curse you!
Hey, what do you know? No problem though. By this point, the cost of purging stones isn't much to worry about. Now all we've got is an easy fight, unless I get cursed again.
Curse you!
I got cursed again. Alright, so apparently Havel's armor has really good curse resistance, and since this isn't a fight where I have to move very fast anyway, I figured I'd just go with the full-on tank strat. Hell yeah, look at that unit of a curse resistance bar. Sorry Seath, but without your ability to curse me, you're just a mild inconvenience. Time to head back to the DLC. Calamite the Dragon is next on our to-do list. I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to make the jump to the Calamite key, which I did fail the first time around. But luckily, it seems that they perfectly designed it so you don't have to roll in order to cross the gap. Nice. So with the key in my possession, I made my way to Goth to watch his legendary snipe, and proceeded to fight the boss that I'd been the most worried about throughout the playthrough. Considering how many fire attacks he has, which will deal chip damage to my shield, as well as his ability to quickly move all around the place by flying, I figured that Calamite would be a perfect recipe for disaster against my build. But all in all, this was definitely the biggest pleasant surprise of my run. He is just as mobile and prone to fire breathing as I mentioned, but for whatever reason, it was actually pretty manageable. Maybe it's just because of how strong my build has become, but as long as I stayed patient, it was honestly a pretty chill and enjoyable duel. Also, I gotta say, blocking a wall of dragon's flames with your shield feels so badass. Man, I thought this was supposed to be a challenge run, but now it's like a challenge for the bosses to defeat me. With my tank build, I feel so powerful, maybe even. So who's next? What boss is ready to die in one attempt? Oh yeah, Manus. Well, I know you're generally considered to be the hardest boss in the game, but what can you really do against my build? Okay, it feels like a challenge run again. Manus was easily one of the hardest fights of the run, partially because he's just a very fast-paced and challenging foe, especially for Dark Souls 1 standards. But a lot of it was because of his magic attacks, which feel like they completely ignore the existence of my shield. By this point, I knew how to utilize my build, just block everything I can while always trying to get in hitting distance and accept whatever elemental chip damage comes my way. But if I wasn't perfectly on top of things, those magic blasts would instantly finish me off. Sometimes I got lucky and was just caught by the side of them, but eventually I was somewhat able to consistently avoid the blasts by moving to the side when they came. It was never perfect, but still enough to give me the time I needed to finish off the Father of the Abyss. DLC officially complete. Now from one abyss-dwelling boss to another, I decided to face one of the final remaining tough foes, the Four Kings. In comparison to a regular playthrough of the game, there were two main issues these guys posed for no rolling or running. One is this grab attack that's literally impossible to outwalk, meaning it was guaranteed damage for them and a time waster for me. Speaking of which, that was the second issue, wasted time. Due to the passive and methodical way that I had to play, it usually gave the kings enough time to spawn in before I could defeat the current one, making the fight get really hectic really fast. But on my third attempt, I decided to fight a bit more aggressively and rely on the power of my build to carry me through, which worked pretty well. Final Lord Soul boss defeated. But before tackling Gwyn, we've got a few extra optional bosses to take care of. Next, it's time to head back to the Asylum to fight the Stray Demon, except I have to be able to make the jump to get there, which I can't do without running. I tried this over and over again to see if I could drop down to it, but it wasn't gonna happen. Just when I was ready to give up on making it to the Asylum, I looked this up and found out that there were others who already managed to do it by using the jumping attack of their weapon. My first try was a failure, but it definitely seemed doable. Weirdly enough, this actually wasn't what helped me make the jump. On my second attempt at using the jump attack, I accidentally did a regular heavy attack, which managed to get me there all on its own. Wasn't expecting that. But regardless, I headed back to the Asylum to fight the Stray Demon. As expected, he wasn't much of a match against my late game build. This boss would have been a lot more noteworthy if I fought him earlier. The AoEs were still annoying due to my lack of mobility, but I beat his ass with not much to worry about. Of course, I also grabbed the doll in order to travel to the Painted World, and went to Anne Orlando to venture into the paintings so I could mercilessly hack away at everyone's favorite half-breed. I don't get much out of this, and there's no real question as to whether or not I can beat Priscilla, but for the sake of the challenge run, it seems to be common etiquette for challenge runners to beat every boss in the game. So I did it. Now onto our final optional bout, Miquella's precursor, Gwendolyn. A boss that many people, myself included, consider one of the easiest in the game. He's got kind of a cool gimmick, but I've never found him all that challenging. Until today. Yeah, this was by far the most unexpectedly challenging boss in the entire run. Here's the thing, his arrows, totally fine, they're easily outrunnable. His blasts of magic balls, a little tougher since they'll chip away at my shield, meaning I have to hide behind pillars, but still not really an issue. His big blasts of magic, potentially dangerous since I can't dodge and they completely ignore the pillars, though I can usually outwalk them. But when this asshole decides to spam the small magic shot and then follow up with the big one, there's nothing I can do except pray for luck. When he shoots the small ones, I'm guaranteed to take damage unless I take cover behind a pillar. So if I'm in a situation where I'm trying to hide behind a pillar to avoid some slowly approaching magic shotgun blasts, but then he releases a giant powerful attack that goes right through the pillars, what the hell am I supposed to do? And just to add the cherry on top, due to my inability to run, I often ended up missing my windows to attack him anyway. Great. After a few tries, I figured it was stupid to use armor that makes me medium speed, so I went with the thief set to get whatever extra mobility I could take. It still wasn't perfect by any means, but we did eventually get there. Never have I felt so relieved to finish off this dude. And now that all of the optional content is finished, there's nothing left but to head to the kiln and face the Lord of Sunlight. Man, it's been a while since I've fought Gwyn without just parrying him to death. My first attempt was going pretty solid, until I eventually tried to heal and instantly got punished with a wombo combo of death. I tried again, and failed again. Alright, you know what? Screw it. We're already using a tanky build in the first place. Might as well wear some armor that gives me enough poise to heal without getting stun locked. This was definitely the right choice. Being able to heal without interruption basically ensured that I could finish the fight as long as I powered through. I still died one more time, but on attempt number 4, I finally did it. I beat every single boss in Dark Souls 1 without rolling or running. And with that, I've officially completed my first challenge run on this channel. It was a little easier than I had expected, but there were still some parts that were uniquely difficult compared to a regular playthrough. Anyway, let me know what you guys thought of the video in the comments. If it was enjoyable, then I'm definitely down to do more of these. I don't plan to turn this into a channel exclusively focused on challenge runs, but it was a nice change of pace to make a video like this. Speaking of future videos, as I alluded to earlier, the Dark Souls 1 enemy ranking is coming very soon. I don't know for sure if it will be my next video, but if not, then it will definitely be the one after that. I figured I might as well get to it while Dark Souls 1 is still fresh in my mind, and I also realized that it's been almost a year since the previous enemy ranking. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Until next time.